Good morning, everyone. I hope that you are all well. And Shavua Tov, good vach to everyone. Today's learning is dedicated in memory of Ami Basari, Paul Casimir, Yauchia ben Moshe Eliezer, Shlomo Chia ben Moshe Eliezer, Ben Sion ben Yitzchak, Ari ben Shimon, Leah Bas Faivel, Avram Mordechai ben Moshe Katner, as well as the Yortzites for today. Tzivia ben Shimon David Hirsch, Yitzchak ben Yechezkel Rothberg, and Yosef ben Shimon Sabin wish their respective families long life. Thank you for joining us. And tomorrow, as Peter so correctly pointed out, is a bank holiday. And in Woodside Park, we have the tradition of turning a bank holiday into a bank holy day. And therefore, of course, we will start our day before we can all go out on picnics, or should I say, go out and sit in traffic for most of the day. We'll start off with some learning. So let's start with this week's parsha. This week's parsha has a special place in my heart because Shelach, lecha, this week's Torah portion, was the one that I was inducted in Glasgow in 2009. Rabbi Lord Sachs came up to, he was, I think, he was Chief Rabbi Sir Jonathan Sachs in those days, but became Lord, and he came up to Glasgow for the day, and it was very memorable, special. He came all the way for my induction, and I remember the conversations and the whole occasion like it was yesterday, and that was the beginning. Well, that was the beginning, and we've never looked back. So, with that introduction, what's Shelach lecha all about, and what are the lessons to be learned? So I don't know if you saw the title. The question which we posed in the title to today is whether we find ourselves in situations or do we put ourselves in situations? Do we have any choice, right? So I think that let's learn the Sedra and then we'll have a better and clearer picture. So we know that the beginning of the parsha discusses about the 12 spies that were sent into spying out the promised land, and they came back, as we know, with a evil report, a bad report about the promised land, the land of Israel, and they spoke badly, and as a result, as a consequence, we spent the next 40 years wandering around until all that generation had died off. So the question is, did they, God says at the beginning, send for yourselves spies. And the commentaries and the great thinkers pick up on the language which is telling. And that is that God said to us, you're asking for spies. This is not a command. I don't need to check out the land of Israel. I'm telling you it's a good land. You want to send spies? You feel that you need it? You can send. It's up to you. That's the position that you will decide to place yourselves in. And as we know, it was a disaster, an unmitigated disaster. The 12 spies, 10 of the 12, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, came back with a bad report. Now, so the question was, did that have to happen or not? Well, there are 2 points. Firstly, that we chose to ask to spy out the land. We didn't have to. It doesn't get better. There's no better money back guarantee than from God himself, who says, this is the promised land, the land that I promised to Abraham, right? This is it. And it doesn't get better. I'm telling you, this is the place to be. And yet we weren't willing to accept that. Okay. So that was the first thing. The first thing is that we chose to place ourselves in that situation. But even when we did place ourselves in that situation, did we actually have to come back with a bad report? And the answer is, of course. Even when you're in a situation, the way that we react to any given situation is entirely in our hands. So point number 1, sometimes we place ourselves in compromising situations which we don't necessarily have to be in. And even when we do find ourselves in any given situation, and even if we didn't have a choice, or we feel we didn't have a choice about being in a given situation, we do have a choice the way we respond, the way we react to any given situation that we find ourselves in. So you can find yourself sometimes through no fault of your own in the most trying situations. But the question is, how do we respond? How do we conduct ourselves? Do we rise to the occasion, or do we resent? And are we're full of pent-up anger and frustration, and then it comes out and we explode on other people. There's an amazing there's an amazing story. And the story goes about the wagon driver, and the wagon driver was retiring. Okay, so he hired people to see. Well, there he tried out different people to see who would be a suitable replacement for him to drive these wagons and to be able to transport people. And he had one question that he asked them. And if you got this question right, then you were the right person for the job. So, and the question was quite simple. You've got 4 mules, you're driving down this track, it's a rainy night, there's a storm, and all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden, the wagon veers off the road, okay? Veers off the road, and you're stuck in the mud. How do you get out? How do you deal with that situation? That's his question. And each person came up with a very clever answer. You take each of the mules off the wagon and you lead them up, or you whip the wagon, with all your force. And he said, no, it's not going to work. I'm telling you, I've tried it. It doesn't work. Well, then he says, then you try to persuade them with food, and then the wagon will move because the mules will be incentivized to be able to lift the wagon out of the mud. He says, no, it's still not work. That's not the answer I'm looking for. He said, the answer to the riddle of how to ensure that you can deal with getting stuck in the mud is a good wagon driver never gets himself in that situation in the first place. He is able to foresee. He's got the fortitude to make sure that he doesn't get himself on that path, on that track, in that situation. And that is really the lesson for life, that hopefully we do, to the best of our abilities, we try to ensure that we don't place ourselves in compromising situations. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy, and we put ourselves in situations that we don't need to. But as a consequence of that, therefore, we find ourselves in a very, very challenging situation. And therefore, it really tests our position and our willingness to be able to overcome the challenges that we face. In the Holocaust, I remember when I was in Auschwitz that one of the phrases that was used by Tzvi Sperber was the choiceless choices. In the Holocaust, genuinely, people had the most impossible. They didn't have choices. In other words, they were given options with the Nazis, sometimes choosing between members of between 2 children even. They were given choices which aren't choices. There was no real right option from a wrong option, and they certainly didn't have a choice to be there. But generally speaking, as people, as individuals, and as a nation, we do have choices. And we can very often avoid given situations. And even when we do find ourselves in any given situation, the way that we react and we respond is telling. And that is what we will see in the next few days, that even if they did choose, that they were circumspect, they wanted to spy out the land, they had ulterior motives, they had biases, they weren't impartial. But the way that they chose to see it with a jaundiced eye, that was their choice. They didn't have to do it. They chose to do it. And therefore, the repercussions and the consequences were as a direct reaction to what and how they behaved. So it's a really, really important lesson that I keep with me, every second of the day, to think ahead and to try to consider and to contemplate and speculate as to what's coming further down the road. When you're with apparently there's a shortage in this country of driving instructors. I don't know if you heard about this, Carol, but they are looking for driving instructors. It's a great opportunity, Estelle. Maybe you should consider it. Anyways, so a good driving instructor, apparently, I didn't have a good driving instructor, but he had a great name. His surname was Miles, John Miles. What a name! I mean, it doesn't get better than that, does it? I guess if your name's, Mr. Learner, that's also a pretty good name. But John Miles for a driving instructor, I mean, what else could he do? Any case, so the good driving instructor will tell you to look at the furthest point ahead, and then you look closer, so that you are looking ahead. You are being proactive. You are foreseeing the future as to what is any obstacles or any dangers that would be posed by what's coming up ahead. And that's really the approach that we are meant to have. So the question which we asked at the beginning, do we find ourselves in this situation, or do we place ourselves in any given situation? The answer is sometimes it's yes and sometimes it's no. It very much depends. We know that when it came to the ram at the time of the binding of Isaac, we know that after Abraham released Isaac, having passed the test with flying colors, there was a ram, which is why we blow the shofar. The ram was caught in the thicket. And many a commentator has said that, in fact, the ram wasn't stuck. The ram was positioned. This was a ram that God Almighty positioned precisely because he knew what was going to happen with Abraham, and therefore he wanted him to offer that ram on the altar. So we don't find ourselves stuck in a situation. We're positioned by God, or we've chosen a certain situation, and the corollary is that we find ourselves in a situation. But once you have that mindset, that it's not that I'm stuck, but I find myself in this situation, I'm positioned in this position, I'm here for a reason, there's a purpose, then instead of being frustrated by when we find ourselves rerouted, right, diverted in life, we actually find that those diversions, those sidetracks, are actually the avoda, the service of God. That's the overcoming the obstacles is the whole purpose of life, and therefore we will accomplish and achieve great things. We're going to move on. Lovely to see you. I did see on the weather forecast that it's meant to be exceptionally bright, but I presume that will be saved for the bank holiday, when we look forward to some very sunny weather and everyone sitting in traffic on the way to the coast. Okay, right. So we carry on with Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Memorial prayer. Adon Olamim Zacho Es Nishmas Ami Bas Aryeh Paul Casimir Yom Yochai ben Moshe Eliezer Shlomo Yechia ben Moshe Eliezer ben Sia ben Yitzchak Aryeh ben Shimon Leah Bas Faiva Avram Mordechai ben Moshe Katna and Yortzites Yechezkel ben Pinchas Saido Rizal Bas Baruch Yisrael ben Tzvi Reeves Miro Bas David Goldstone Eliezer ben Pinchas Schulman and Levo ben Shaul Craig Shalach Tevia ben Shimon David Hirsch Yitzchak ben Yechezkel Rothberg Joseph ben Shimon Sabin Shalchu li lamam bagareiden te menuchos amlachim balarachamim yatrim b'seisek anafab li'alamim v'yitzor zechester shasam adna imnachlasam v'yanuchi b'shlam mishkavam v'namar amen. Long life wishes to everyone. Lastly, before Shlema prayer, we have in mind all those that are still recovering in hospital. Friends, what an opportunity we have every day. We pray for those that are unwell in our communities, those that are unwell in Israel, those that have been injured and maimed and harmed as a result of Meron, as a result of the Guardians of the Walls, then so many other catastrophes in Israel. We wish them all a speedy and a full recovery. The least we can do is pray. Misha Berach Avosenu Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo Yivarach Rapha Sechelim Bavo Shani Mispalim Bavo Ram V'Yitzchak HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachem Aleichem Lachem Alfosam Yishlach Lem Fushlim Neshmayim L'Chol Avim B'Soch Shachu Yisrael Rafuas HaNefesh V'Zagov Hashavos Makriv Namar Amen. Hope you like the new flyer. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at 9:30. Bank holiday, 9:30. You've got to lay in bed. See you tomorrow at 9:30.